Welcome to the next in my series of video tutorials. Today we are going to go back to half square triangles. But instead of making them two at a time, what if you need 8 identical half square triangles? Well, you have some options. You can cut 4 little squares, draw your line, do your seams on both sides. But if you're like me, you don't want to be cutting a zillion things before you start sewing. I like to cut a few things, start sewing, then maybe cut some more things. So we're going to learn how to do half square triangles 8 at a time. All right, here's some, obviously I will go over my standard things to know about my tutorials. I make my measurements exact. They're not oversized to cut down unless I tell you, and this is not one of those times. Of course, I don't like sewing unsupported bias seams. We're cutting squares. We're not cutting triangles to make these. And remember that the standard practice of all quilt writers is that we give you our measurements based on the finished size of the block. Finished means what it looks like after it's sewn in. So the finished size does not include the 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. So we're going to make 8 half square triangles. Let's talk some math. It's actually very easy. If you remember from the 2 at a time half square triangles, the math was the finished size of your half square triangles plus 7/8 of an inch. Well, you just take that finished size plus 7/8 and you multiply it by 2. Now you can do this as the first step of a whole bunch of 1/4 square triangles. If you're going to be doing 1/4 square triangles, it is the finished size plus 1 1/4 inches and then multiplied by 2. Everything else about how to do this is all the same. So let's get started with making 8 half square triangles all at once. So here are my 2 squares I've cut. I am making 8 3-inch half square triangles. So each square is 7 1/4 inches square. On the back of one of these squares, draw both diagonal lines as well as the vertical and horizontal center lines. If you now look at just 1/4 of this square, it looks just like one of the squares with the single diagonal line when you were making half square triangles 2 at a time. Stack the 2 squares on top of each other, right sides together. If necessary, pin the squares to keep them from slipping. This is recommended if the squares are very large. Sew seams 1/4 inch on either side of the diagonal lines. Do not sew on or beside the vertical and horizontal center lines. Cut the half square triangles apart by first cutting on the vertical and horizontal center lines, then cut on the diagonal lines. Open the half square triangles, press the seam allowances to one side, and then trim the dog ears. If you're just making half square triangles, you are now done. If you're using this as the first step to making 1/4 square triangles, now go on to step 2 in the 1/4 square triangle tutorial. I will link that below. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed learning how to make 8 half square triangles all at once. It's very simple, easy to do, super quick. It's actually faster than making them 2 at a time because you're not stopping and starting your machine as much. So I hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you next time. If you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up on YouTube so the algorithm tells me that you liked it, and we'll see you next time.